special guest, award-winning journalist for SNY and also the New York Post, Dexter Henry. What's up, Dexter? How you doing today?
What's good, Alex? Thanks for having me. I appreciate being here with you. Thank you so much. It's an honor.
Of course, man. And like you said, you're very busy. You have a year-round schedule covering all sports. Kind of run me through the late days of August, dog days of summer schedule. What's that look like for you?
Yeah, the late days of August, dog days of summer, right? It's been been doing a lot of work in the studio. We have the US Opens going on right now here in New York. So that's been busy, which is great because there's been another thing to cover. This has been a summer where there's been a lot of these other things to cover beside the traditional sports that we cover here in America. So we had Copa America and the Euros back in June. Then we had the Olympics through July. So that was fun. And then some of the US Open now into August. So that's been that. A lot of it has been prepping for football, looking ahead with our local teams here, the Giants and the Jets, looking nationally. I work on a basketball show, so the WNBA is heating up as they're in the stretch run of the season, and a lot of talk around the New York Liberty, who have the best record in the league. So that's going on. And then, you got to start thinking about right around the corner. Hockey training camp is about to open up in about 3 weeks, basketball in about 4 weeks. So it never stops. Sports never stops. Journalism never stops. It's busy, but it's a fun time. It's about to get real busy, I think, in the next 4 to 5 weeks. Once you have baseball overlapping with what I didn't even mention
Yeah,
with football,
yeah,
and then basketball and hockey, it's gonna get crazier in about 5 weeks. So I love it though. No
yeah.
complaints.
And October, that's like my favorite time of year because, like you said, it's overlapping. You got MLB playoffs, NBA starting, obviously NFL's in full swing. Um, you talked about covering the Olympics this summer as well as tennis, to name a few of those sports. How crucial is that trying to get into sports, being versatile and covering all aspects of sports because nowadays you kind of have to do it all.
Yeah, it's something my mentors have always told me, and it's something I try to tell younger sports broadcasters and journalists is be as versatile as possible. You don't want to be a one-trick pony. In fact, I don't think you can be nowadays in sports. I think it's not. I think sometimes people think about it as I have to know everything in every sport, Alex, and you can't. There's going to be maybe one or two that you're more really in the trenches because nobody has the time to follow everything that deeply, right?
Right,
Like I would
right.
say basketball is more my bag, but I think being able to speak on other sports, just being aware of what's going on, constantly reading, that's definitely what's important. Being up on what's going on in news. That's it. You may not be the insider for the NHL, but if you know what's going on, the main players, kind of what's been going on with the league. That's that because the more versatility you have, the more marketable you can be, the more companies, outlets are going to want
Mhm.
you for your talent with that. So being versatile as possible is key, man. That is
Yeah.
absolutely key.
And that'll weave out most of the people because if you're a true sports fan, you can cover cricket or squash and you still find a way to enjoy it and say, hey, this is pretty cool of a sport. Were there any sports
Yeah.
like that you're like, oh, I kind of enjoy this now after covering it?
Yo, it's so funny you even mentioned cricket because I had a situation. I'll tell you this,
I
right?
just
Like
threw
I
that
had,
one out there. I don't,
yeah, you just threw it out there, but it's funny. I'm gonna tell you a situation that happened with me at work this year. This was back in I can't remember if this was May or June, but the Cricket World Cup was here in New York,
Right,
and
right.
one of my that we were doing some coverage at the New York Post, so then one of my bosses reached out and said we had a meeting. He was like, "Does anybody know anything about the sport of cricket? Because we want to do this video where we sort of explain to the American sports audience
Mhm.
what cricket is." And so my family's from the Caribbean, from the island of Grenada, and so I am not. I'll be admit, I am not a big cricket fan, but people like my dad and other people in my family grew up playing it. So I know the sport. I know of it. I could explain it. So I did this explainer video
Wow.
and I know what the sport is. So that helped a little bit. Just culturally, I knew what the sport was. So there have been times like that where just knowing another sport can help.
Hmm.
Soccer's not big in the States, but I'm a big soccer fan. I'm a big Liverpool fan because you can have here. I'm a big
Yeah,
Liverpool
there we
fan.
go.
So um that has helped me too in certain things. Just knowing that because of that, a friend that I used to work with at another station who now works for BBC, when the USA played and had a draw with England in the last World Cup, she called me and said, "Hey, could you come on BBC and talk about it from an American's perspective?" So just being versatile in different sports has definitely
Hmm.
opened me up to whether it's doing my own content or creating stuff for the places I work for, or people asking me to come on and talk about it. That's definitely helped. So there's been some, I don't want to say obscure. Cricket is kind of obscure in the States, but there's been
Yeah,
some sports that aren't as popular that people have asked me
right.
to do some stuff with. Yeah.
Yeah, no, well, yeah, cricket I know is one of the most popular sports in the whole world. So,
Second most
and
popular sport in the world.
right,
Yep.
yeah, exactly. And it's great gaining some traction in the States because they had a big upset against one of the top teams. I saw that, so it's
Yeah,
good to
had a
see.
big upset against it was against Pakistan. And so
Right.
that was
Yep.
huge and big in the World Cup. And so yeah, interesting.
I want to talk to you about your two weekly shows that you have. The New York Sports Rapid Rundown, which is kind of like, you know, giving a daily rundown of, all the New York sports teams, but also the New York Got Game, which is more like, feel good feature stories of, people all around the New York. It's kind of a good mix of, you know, covering it professionally, but also doing stories that extend beyond the court. How
Yeah.
awesome is that to you? And it must be a very exciting job for you.
Yeah, so the first show, New York Sports Rapid Rundown, we've been doing that one for a little bit over a year. That's been fun. I mean, the reason I love that show is that we get different voices from around the New York area that maybe always some very prominent, some not so prominent. But the fun thing about that show is I've never had a repeat guest yet. I've done probably about,
Wow.
I think it's about 55 episodes. We've never had a repeat guest. We've always had a different voice. At some point we will, but so
Hmm.
for I'm trying to push it as long as I can.
Yeah, yeah,
And it makes me want to look for new voices around. So just having people to come in and talk with me about whatever's the hottest three topics of the week in sports, that's been pretty cool. That's been fun to do. New York got game because basketball is my love. Um, that's been fun. And I'm glad you take from that the show is, we talk about everything in New York basketball, but it's not just, it's not just a Knicks show or a Nets show. We do Liberty, we do grassroots basketball, we do high school basketball. The last episode I had a really is one of my favorite episodes because we talked with Sinead Joy Jones, who is the founder of Grow Our Game, and it's a grassroots organization that helps get young girls in New York City involved in basketball. And just her passion for it and her talking about it, it was just, I love that because like you said, it's stories beyond the court. A
hmm
lot of times you talk about the X's and O's and what goes
right,
on, but when you have those features, you'll be able to talk with people about what they do sort of off the court. With that, that's fun too. So that's the show. When the Knicks season start, it'll be heavy Knicks and Nets. Depending, they're not going to be so
yeah,
good, but
yeah,
we do try to incorporate other things to make it interesting and get people around the world of basketball in different spaces. And I think that's the fun thing about the show is just trying to push it and get different people and different voices on it because that's what makes it interesting. I don't want to talk to the same people all the time. So, always want to
right.
push and try to get new stories. Yeah.
And like you said, you could go to any like news outlet and find the highlights of the game, what this guy's averaging. But when you get those stories, I feel like it brings people together and kind of connects, a community. So it's great
Yeah,
seeing
no,
that.
it definitely does, and you see how people are so appreciative of it when they see things, especially with basketball, how it connects to the community on the grassroots level. There's a lot of people who've reached out to me recently about that interview, and the last couple of interviews I've done with some street ball and grassroots the last couple of weeks, and it's a little different. You're not going to get the same viewership that you do for Knicks
Hmm.
or Nets or even Liberty, but it's different. The people in that part of the community, the basketball community here in New York, they appreciate that, and they've sent that to me, and that means a lot because when you reach those
Right.
folks, and those folks get some love too for what they do for the game, it's beautiful. Yeah,
And then it's also very interesting that you said that you haven't had a repeating guest for the New York Sports Rapid Rundown. And I think that goes to show like I don't think you can go to any other place in the country and like just find people as passionate as people, who work in New York sports and talk about it. Like how fun is it being a part of, New York sports?
man, it's a blessing because I'm a born and raised New Yorker from Brooklyn. To I don't take it for granted any day to work for the New York Post and to work for New York Post and SNY, and it's fun to be a part of it because it's such a great energy. We have so many teams. We have so many great fans
Yeah.
who have so many great different opinions. There's people who want to talk to me when they see me about the Knicks or the Mets or the Jets or the Knicks and Yankees or whatever's going on, and it's the passion for New York sports that keeps you going. I said this the other day on the last time I had Aaliyah Funchal on for my episode of Rapid Rundown. We do this because we love the sport. Like all of us who get into sports broadcasting, aspiring sports broadcasters,
Right.
yourself, we do this because we love it, and you have to keep that love for it. That's what you're a fan. You're a fan of sports. You're a fan of athletes doing great things. You should be a fan of how sports connects with culture and people, because sports is so much more than what happens on the court. And I think that just being part of it, man, I'm blessed. Like I'm blessed to cover sports in the place where I'm from. Um, that's what the teams that I love and to be around and the fans. I'm just blessed. It's amazing to be a part of it. I think anybody in this country, if you're able to work in this industry and work home, that's a beautiful feeling,
Hmm.
because you know the pulse of the sports fan where you work from, and so when you're connected like that, it shows, and it helps. So yeah, man, I love that. I love it. I don't take it for granted, and I'm blessed to have had that opportunity in my career, and I'm blessed to share the platforms I have with other people. I think that's the best thing. It's like
Hmm.
I get to do this, but it doesn't mean anything if I'm not able to share it with other people and give other people platforms to do stuff. So that's my big thing. You know, I hope my mark in sports journalism is that it's a beauty that I got to work in New York City, but also I was able to give back and help the next generation of
Hmm.
sports journalists coming up in NYC.
And I saw it kind of firsthand there when I met you at Summer League. Obviously, I was working with CP a little bit, but just asking you guys questions, picking your brain. You guys gave out real thought out answers, and again, it's like a second nature thing for you guys. Talking sports, talking New York, it's something like what's better than that?
No, there's nothing better than that. Shout out to CP, one of my
Yeah,
really good
he's such a
friends
good guy, man. Yeah.
in this industry. He'll actually be a guest on the Rapid Rundown real soon. He hasn't been a guest on that either, but he's been on plenty. He's been on Got Game with me plenty and done a lot of Nick videos. Great guy, and he's very passionate about giving back in the way that I am. Um, yeah, man, it's just, and I think we love that. And it was great when we connected to Summer League, and we love meeting other young journalists that want to do this and want to create their own content. That's one of the biggest things I tell young journalists. Alex, you talk to me about this, and I say one of the biggest things I tell people is like, yo, create your own shows, interview people, reach out, make connections like you did with me. You asked me to come on,
Hmm.
right? And these are the things you should be doing now, is just building those reps, becoming a better interviewer, just making connections with people. It's so important. So when I see other people doing that, it's great. But yeah, man, just to talk about sports in New York, and there's so many talented people like
Hmm.
CP. Um, it's beautiful. It's a blessing, man. It's truly a blessing.
And you even said it yourself before, like you believe in creating your own opportunities, like whatever that is, networking, reaching out to people, doing things out of your comfort zone. Has that always been instilled in you at a young age?
Yeah, it's funny, man. Like when I say young, I'll say younger in my career, because I'll say this, Alex. If it wasn't for me creating my own opportunities, I probably wouldn't be sitting here talking to you. Just to share a story. So when I was early in my career, um, I wasn't getting some of the opportunities I thought I should be getting, or they weren't coming along. And one of my mentors, Jamoke Davis, he had said to me, well, why don't you start doing something where you're in New York, you have all these opportunities where you're out covering stuff for yourself.
Hmm.
And I started my own production company / media outlet called Backpack Broadcasting. And what I did, this was like in the late 2000s, early 2010s, I was just going out and covering different sports, particularly high school basketball, in New York, and like taking my camera and going out and shooting games and cutting highlights and doing reports, and that gave me reps when other people weren't giving it to me.
Hmm.
So, and I invested in myself, and because of that, I was putting my stuff up on YouTube. Then I had a website and did all that. That's what caught the eyes of the News 12 networks here in the New York area, and that's how I got out of the opportunity. So I say that. That's why I literally pass it on to people. If it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have got out other opportunities. And so it's why you can't wait for anybody to give you opportunities. You have to create your own sometimes and get people to see you. I mean, we just talked about CP. CP is a living embodiment of that
Yeah.
and what he's done with Knicks Fan TV. And he, I've spoken to him about this personally and on camera. I'm so proud of what he's done. And That's why I support those guys, because they're just like me. They've sort of made it themselves. Yeah, now I work with different outlets and stuff, but I've done
Hmm.
a lot of independent work, that I'm very proud of, and that has also helped a lot of other people, as well too. So yeah, that's something that I would say was instilled in me in my early 20s and early in my career. And I'm grateful for my mentor, Jamal K. Davis, instilling that in me, because if he hadn't, I think that I might have waited and been like, oh, this isn't happening for me, so
Hmm.
I'm not going to do this. And, you know, at the time I did that was sort of it was a perfect storm, right? Because I was talking to someone about this recently. It was YouTube had been around for about 5 years, and that was just at the start of Twitter,
Hmm.
2009, 2010. 2010 is when I started doing it. So it's just at the start of Twitter, and it's really where you can get your work out through social media. And so it was just using what you have at the time. Now I think it's even easier for people to
Right.
get content out there, right? With the different platforms, whether it's TikTok, whether it's Instagram, you can get your stuff out there, and you can get it out there really quickly. So
Hmm.
I really encourage young people, like, to do it. The hardest thing is to jump, though. I don't want to make it sound like it's easy, because it's not, right?
No,
And
for
it's not
sure.
easy to create good quality content. Like, you look at CP, what he does with Knicks Fan TV, they put a lot of work into that,
And he's
right?
working his ass
And
off like every
yeah,
game.
he
Yeah.
works his ass off. There's no doubt about it, right? There's a lot of detail, a lot of work that goes into that. And I've seen them put in the work. And so, but I think if you have that work ethic, that drive,
Right.
you can absolutely make it happen for yourself, and have your own outlet like CP does, where he's working for himself. So you just have to have that drive and believe in the content and connect with your audience. But there's something for everybody out there, and that's the beauty of things right now.
Hmm. Yeah, you talk about how, nowadays there's more platforms out there, more, social media, content creating, all that stuff. Back in 2009 when you kind of started, like it must have been more of a risk for you, right? Like, oh, there's not many people doing this. Twitter's not that big, YouTube's not that big. Talk to me
Mhm.
about, that time.
Yo, that's a good word you use there in terms of risk, Alex, because I think the risk was, I don't, and it's funny, I don't know, I'm not sure I'm thinking as you're saying about this, because I hadn't thought about this for a long time. I'm not sure it's that much different.
Because like
The
like yeah,
risk I,
right.
the
I was just
risk
saying
I'll
like,
say is,
yeah.
yeah, go ahead. You go.
So I don't want to interrupt you. I was just saying because before he goes, like me in college, I can go on Instagram and see, I could see CP, I could see all these guys
Mm,
content creating. I'm like, oh, that's cool. Like you didn't have that back then. You're like, what is this going to lead to? So that's what I'm trying to say. But
that's a good
no,
point.
go on.
No, it's a good, no, you're right. You're right, though. You're
Right.
right. It's a great point. I didn't even think about it that way, in that you didn't see in that time as many people doing it. There were a couple of people doing it, and one person I could think of in particular, JR Sport Brief, who now JR host on Infinity Sports Network, and I work there. I do update anchoring for them, so we sometimes work together. He was doing some of that, but there was, I mean, honestly, now I'm listening to you say this, and I don't think about this. It's funny,
Hmm.
you put this in my head. At the time, when I decided to do backpack broadcasting, particularly covering high school sports, there was nobody else that was in New York City. There was some other small outlets, but consistently giving you like video updates, like going to
Hmm.
these big games, interviewing these players, giving you reports, and putting it out. One thing, and so it was scary, because I was like, is anybody going to like this? Is anybody
Right.
going to see this? That was the biggest thing for me. Now I think back about it, it was like, is anybody going to see this? Like, I remember putting my first video on YouTube, and I don't remember how many views it had. Maybe it had like 20 views, right? Like nobody
Right.
was
Right.
watching. But this is, hopefully somebody takes a lesson from this story that I'm going to say, because I think it applies today. The key thing was, at that time, was I knew all these coaches around the New York City area. And when I told them about what I wanted to do, a lot of them were so supportive and was like, yeah, Dex, you can come through to our school. The athletic directors will give you credentials, no problem. We know you. It was never a problem. And that helped. And what happened was, the more and more I went to these schools, the more and more I showed up through the season, people started recognizing it.
Hmm.
And I remember, I'll never forget this. I remember this one day I walked in this school, Thomas Jefferson High School here in Brooklyn, and I walked in, and I can't remember. I don't think I had made a logo or had an actual logo. I had eventually made a logo, but I walked in, somebody's like, yo, what's up, man? What's up, Backpack? And that was the name of our company, Backpack Broadcasting.
Hmm.
So and I was like, oh shoot,
Yeah.
like
It's a good
somebody knows
feeling.
this.
Yeah.
And then then it started happening more. I would go into these
Mhm.
gyms and people were like, yo, what's up, backpack? Yo, I watch your videos. I love your videos. One time I was on the street somewhere going to a store and somebody said to me, hey man, you're the guy that does backpack broadcasting. Yo, I
Right.
love your high school coverage. I think I say all that to say is you have to stick with what it is that you're doing. At first I wasn't getting the views. I worked on certain things. I made a website. I developed a logo. I did things into that. I invested in myself, but it took time. But people saw it. If you do good work and whatever your audience is, they connect with it. They'll eventually see it. And some of it mattered that I was out there at these games and it was a different time and I was showing my face. But coaches supported it. The players supported it. That was the biggest thing. The young players supported it and they liked it and they were sharing it on Twitter. They were sharing it on Facebook. So that's really what helped. And that showed me the power of social media. But you make a great point, Alex. It was scary at that time because I was the only person doing it. And in New York, particularly where I was covering in Brooklyn, the only person doing it was News 12. Now, the irony of all of this was all the guys I knew who worked for News 12,
Mhm.
and I'm good friends with these guys to these days, they would see my stuff and be like, yo, this guy's good and he's beating us. He's beating our 9:30 or 10 o'clock newscast. This game's at 5. He's getting this up by 7:30 or 8. It's out there. And that also showed you where the industry was going, right? It's about immediacy and getting content
Mhm.
out there. And because I was able to get it out there quicker, they saw it and it was good. And that's actually what attracted News 12 to eventually hire me
Wow.
because they saw me, they saw my work, they respected it. It wasn't even like they were looking at it as competition. They just respected it and was like, yo,
Mhm.
this guy's a good reporter. And my former boss there, shout out to my former boss, Pat O'Keefe, who I actually just got off the phone with before we had this conversation. He hired me and I'm grateful for that because that was huge for my career. But yeah, man, it
Yeah.
was a little scary. It was scary. Like I don't think I think I haven't thought about that fear for a while, but you're right. It was scary because when you don't see other people doing it, the hardest thing to do is jump and say, I'm going to take this opportunity because you don't know where it's going to go. But I think what I will say to that last thing I'll say to wrap this up is I think the one thing is I believed in myself that getting the reps would pay off. And that's all it was about for me, to be honest with you. I wasn't trying to make money off of it. I just was like, look, I want to get reps to doing this. And I hope somebody sees me and sees the talent. And that ended up happening.
Right.
But I wasn't like, man, I want my company to blow up. And if it had, it had. But there's a lot of things I did through backpack broadcasting, and hopefully I still bring back some other stuff that I'm still planning to do with it because it's still thriving. But yeah, man, the goal was accomplished. The goal was to get
Mhm.
reps and be seen, and it happened.
Yeah, no, that's just a great example of, you get your reps in, and eventually you get recognized. And that's pretty cool that it all ended up you getting hired by News 12. People were like, who is this guy? And then they bring you on board. That must have been fun.
That was fun, man. It was a fun time. I loved working for News 12, and it,
Yeah.
it was great too because I ended up doing news and sports, and then working in the place where I'm from. It was great. It was fantastic.
And then what about finally, getting hired by the New York Post and SNY and doing stuff with them? Was that a great feeling, kind of like a breakthrough, like, I made it this far and then now I'm, doing stuff on large platforms where, the whole, New York can see and even the whole country.
Yeah, man. It's timing is everything. So this is technically my second time with the New York Post because I worked for them back in from 2007 to 2009 as a video journalist. And so um, coming back was great because I have such great relationships with a lot of the reporters there and some of the staff there. But my career had a weird journey in that after News 12, I was doing sports and news there. I was a weather reporter. Some people don't know this. I
Wow.
was a weather reporter for 3 years at AccuWeather. And it was a great opportunity because I got to report nationally and travel, but it wasn't really what I wanted to do. And I told myself the next thing I wanted to do was back in sports, and I wanted to do it on the digital side. So when the opportunity came up with the Post, it was actually exactly what I wanted to be doing. Um, Actually, when I took that job, I didn't know until I got it that they were going to do the partnership with SNY. So that only increased the viewership and the reach. So to me, it was great. It was two great New York sports brands coming together, and we get to do great content. And now doing two shows. I think it's been better than I even imagined it would be. To be honest with you,
Hmm.
I was very excited about the opportunity to do it, and now as I reflect more on it, some of the work I've done in almost 3 years we've been doing it has been really fantastic. And I think it says a lot for digital media and where it's going. For newspaper outlets and digital outlets, and regional sports networks, the viewership and reach that you can get online that's where the
Hmm.
audience is now. And broadcast journalism has evolved. I always kind of knew it. I always loved being in the digital space from the time I started this. When I got out of college, the digital space back in 2005 was kind of like frowned upon. It was looked as lesser than. I still think some people look at it that way,
Hmm.
but now with social media and kind of what I was able to do in my career was the digital space, right? Using
Right.
YouTube, using my website. So I've always kind of been in the space. And I think I've always known like what works for certain audiences in there. I think one of the benefits of my career is that I jumped on that earlier. I was kind of an anti like network. Not that I'm against working for network TVs or anything, but I kind of
Hmm.
saw where this is going, and things are you have more reach in the digital space. There's more people you could hit. There's more audiences you can hit globally. It's not just locally or nationally. It's globally, and you just have a bigger reach, and people can watch your content when they want, how they want, and that's it. So I love what we do with the New York Post and SNY, and um, yeah, it's bigger than I thought it would have been. We're growing. We're continuing to grow. We're continuing to push. We're
For
trying to do
sure.
new things. And I think that's the fun thing. And I give credit to the people I work for. They've let me have good creative control with my shows, Rapid Rundown and New York Got Game. And um, it's fun. I just want to push and do more and around New York sports and continue to push. Yeah, so I'm excited, man.
Hmm. When
Definitely
did you
been
realize? Oh,
uh
sorry. You don't go for it.
I don't know if it's I call it I made it moment, but it's definitely a moment of gratitude I always have about where I am and what I've done in the space. So yeah.
Sorry for I keep interrupting. I'm sorry about that.
No, you're good, bro. You're good.
When did you realize that you had a skill and a talent for, talking to people, storytelling, and
Mm,
just back and forth interviews? Because that's something that, I personally want to have a career
that's a
in. So
good
if you have any
question.
advice.
That's a good question because here, and I'll answer it like this. I think I should have realized it a lot earlier in my life than I did. Like I always knew that I was pretty good at public speaking
Hmm.
and talking to people, and I had a love for storytelling. And I'll tell you some of the roots of it. Back when I was in sixth grade, so 11 years old, I well, I had done this years before when I was at elementary school. We had something in New York City, it's done, but they had this thing called the storytelling contest. And what you had to do was you had to memorize the story and then relay it back and tell the story like really well with emotion and feeling and all this stuff. And I did it through elementary school and I like, never won in my district. And then I got to middle school and one of the most important teachers in my life, teacher named Miss Hyde. I went to Philippa Schuyler Middle School. I did it in front of the class and she saw something in me. She was like, yo, you're good at this. You need to try out. She was like, you need to try out for the school. I never forget, she said to me, I don't think we've ever had somebody from the school win the district, but I think you could do it as a sixth grader. And I was like, really?
Wow.
So she did it. I went through the school competition. I win the school competition. I go through the district, I win competition. I go to now the borough, so you have to win for the entire borough of Brooklyn. I win that as a sixth grader, and I get to the finals. I didn't win in the finals, so the story didn't end super happy, but I was a borough champion, and I had done it. And I was a storyteller, right? Like I love storytelling. I was involved in my school newspaper. I wrote sports for the school newspaper. But when I got to high school, I kind of was like, oh, I don't know if I could have a career in journalism. I really hadn't seen anybody do it, especially that looks like me. So I didn't think I really focused on it. But fast forwarding to college, I went to college at the University of Pittsburgh, and I initially went to study to be athletic trainer for a team. But after a year of college, I realized like I didn't like the sciences. And I told my dad, there was a meeting, my mentor, Jamoke Davis, I got invited to work. They were trying to start up a Panther Sports Network, which eventually became at Pitt to basically our own student run, sports station. And I went to that meeting and I was like, this is what I want to do. That's when I knew what I wanted to do. But I never forget, I told my dad that I was going to switch my major. And he was like, yeah. I always saw this for you. And he said this to me. He's like, look, you did this when you were young, you did storytelling, you were able to do all this stuff. I see this for you. Go and do it. And that gave me all the confidence to just go forth with it. So to answer that question, I think I always knew when I was young that I had this in me, and I always had a love for sports, and I was always writing. I used to write sports stories, like my own books. I used to literally do this, like sit and write stories. And I was always reading the newspaper at school and high school back when people bought newspapers. I'd bring the newspaper to school, and the first thing I read was sports.
Mhm.
So my passion has always been sports and storytelling. It's always been there. I just think there was a while I ignored it, but then when it came where I couldn't ignore it anymore, I didn't. So I pushed into it. So I would tell people, if you recognize it early, just jump right into it. Just do it. Jump into it.
No, it's cool you say that because, like, at least for me, I think it's like sports is just it's something that has always gravitated to me, and whether I'm like sitting on the couch with my friends watching the game, like it's like one of my favorite things to do. That's why I like doing these interviews, like just hearing your story. Like I could do this for hours, just talk. It just comes naturally, and I think for some of us, like it's something that like we love to do. So it's cool to hear it from you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think if you love to do it, man. Just go for it. If you love talking, if you love, storytelling is like you said, you just hit on something good. It's about finding about people's stories. What's their stories? I hope that my story is saying something that somebody watches this that inspires them. I get inspired by so many other people. I get inspired by people like you just doing your own show, because people say, "How, Dexter, you've been doing this for a while. How does that still inspire you?" Because there's always somebody still going for it. There's always somebody that can feel the way I felt or has that love for storytelling or interviewing that I do. And so when I see that, it's just inspirational. I'm like, Alex is doing it. So, I can keep doing it because maybe you see something in me that inspires you and vice versa. And it's a beautiful part of humanity, man. We should all try to inspire each other and uplift each other. And so, yeah, man. I'm glad you love doing it too. It's beautiful.
So yeah, while we're on the topic of interviews, do you have any specific favorites or people that you're like, wow, I just talked to this guy and I was able to share this conversation?
Man, okay. So one of my favorite interviews happened really early in my career. I was a newspaper reporter for a small paper in Brooklyn, and I got to interview Rachel Robinson, the widow of Jackie Robinson. Um, that probably means a lot to me more than any interview. Big Jackie Robinson fan and know a lot of the history and obviously what he stood for and what he was able to accomplish breaking the color barrier in baseball. So I've always been fascinated with what he had to go through and what he really stood for and what he should mean as a hero for everybody in this country. So to interview her was great. Was full of wisdom. That's an interview that's almost
Wow.
wow, that's almost 20 years ago. That I did that interview, but that was and I was young, but she was
Mhm.
so great. Um, Trying to think what else I've done that I've really liked. I got a chance last year to interview Jamaican track superstar Shelly Ann Fraser Price. That was fantastic. I loved interviewing her. I think that was not the first track athlete I interviewed, but the first like major superstar track athlete, somebody who's well decorated, all these gold medals. She was amazing. It was remote, but it was an amazing interview. Um, I just talked about Shanae Joy Jones, who I just interviewed the other day. That is up there as one of my favorites. I think there's Walt Clyde Frazier. I interviewed Walt twice this year.
Wow.
But the first one I did earlier this year was probably one of my favorites. I mean, I told him I've been listening to him since I was
Yeah.
7 years old on the radio as a Knick fan at first. So that was a honor to do. Gus Johnson, who's one of my
I
play-by-play,
love Gus
uh,
Johnson.
yeah,
Um,
Gus is one of my play-by-play
yeah.
heroes and idols, and to interview him, I got the connection to do that about I think that was 2 years ago, and that was fantastic. Um, I don't even know. I'm trying to. It's funny. You start doing so many.
Yeah. Yeah.
You sometimes forget. I've had some really good people. Um, I've done some stuff with, but those are some of my favorites around sports that I've done that have just been really amazing, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to do that. I've done so. Sometimes I don't think about it, so people ask me stuff like this. But
Mhm.
I've had Olympians, um, champions in different sports. of a variety of different things. Darryl Strawberry, that's another one that's got to go up there. That was very early in my career, and I got
Yeah.
to interview Darryl Strawberry, who is like, I mean, he's one of the reasons I grew up as a Mets fan. So like that's been amazing. I've been blessed, man. I've done some really good ones, and hopefully some more good ones to come that'll really excite me. So yeah.
Cause I'm sure you're very busy, so I'll make this the last one. Just like a overarching theme of the fall, just give some advice to just young aspiring journalists and people who want to get into sports.
Yeah, my biggest advice, one, is take the craft seriously. Um, Respect the craft that you want to get in journalism, learn about it, find people that you admire in it. And you never want to mimic somebody. You have to find your own voice. There's people who I've loved. I'm a huge fan. I just mentioned Gus Johnson as a play-by-play voice. Brian Gumble, one of my heroes in this, Robin Roberts, um, Bob Costas. There's so many people whose styles I've loved, and I've taken a little bit and found my own voice with it. There's people I currently admire in this space of media. Bomani Jones is one of them. There's a lot of people I've really great admiration for what they do. And so yeah, I just think, find those people, learn from them, find your own style. But the biggest thing kind of goes back to something we talked about before. Create, 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 create. Create your own content. Don't wait for the opportunities. The
Mhm.
beauty of social media is that these brands, these outlets, they can find you. People found me. And I think there was with less social media than even is today. So there's multiple ways to tell stories now, right? Like I know some people who maybe are my age or older frown upon this, but you can use TikTok to be creative with your stories. There's many different ways to get stuff out there. There's different forms of journalism, and I think that's good as long as we all have the diversity in it. So I think that's my advice. My other big piece of advice is network, network, network. Use LinkedIn, take opportunities when you're out meeting people. Don't be afraid to reach out and ask somebody for their contact. Don't be afraid to ask them to come on your show or your podcast. You never know. Somebody might say yes. It might be the building of a new relationship for you, somebody that can give you some advice or be in touch with down the way or think of you when an opportunity comes about. So networking, I think, is huge and key, and is something that I wish I'd done more of earlier in my career. I think I've done a better job probably the last like 5 to 7 years in networking, but it's something I could have done more earlier. And just network, network, network. And the other thing I would say is, as you network, be sure to help other people along the way. You're only good as how you give back. So, you can't just take, you have to give back as well too. And I think that's very important. So that's some of my advice to young journalists is network, find your mentors, create your own content, and work hard and don't give up. Don't give up on your dreams.
Dexter, I really appreciate you for sharing all these stories and advice and information today. And apologies for the malfunction to begin with, but
Nah,
we
man,
made it work.
you're good.
We
Nah,
made it
you're good. We
work.
made it work. Appreciate
Yeah.
you, Alex. Thank you so
Thanks,
much, man.
Dexter. Would love to keep in touch, man. But thank you again. Really appreciate it.
Anytime.
Have a good one, man.